I'm Ariana Tejero. Welcome to TVGuestpert's broadcast podcast. This is the show where we talk to Hollywood's executives, creatives, innovatives, authors, and more. And the hope here is that you watch this episode and you take something from it that could apply to your own branding, cross promotion, and marketing. And on this episode, we're esteemed to be joined by entertainment journalist veteran Reba Merrill. Thank you so much for being on this episode with us, Reba.
My pleasure.
Why don't we start out with a little info on who you are and your background?
Who am I? I asked that same question to Harrison Ford, and he said, "This is me, but in better clothing." But I'll give you a little bit more. I always loved being a performer. And I found out at a reasonable age that I wasn't a very good actress, even though I thought that's what I wanted. And due to circumstances beyond my control, meaning that I got married a lot, I finally settled on a career in my 30s instead of in my 20s. And I got a local television show in Phoenix, Arizona. And then I got another local television show in Phoenix, Arizona, but it was 5 days a week. And it was great. And then I was replaced by black and white cartoons. So then I was unemployed. This is the business. And so I got an offer from CBS in San Diego. And it turned out to be my dream job. And it turned out to be exactly where I needed to be when I needed to be. And they did two things. When they interviewed me, they asked me what I earned in Phoenix and how old I was. And I answered, I'm going to tell the truth. I lied about what I was being paid. I was co-hosting the show in Phoenix, and he got 3 times more than I did. Wow. And when I asked why, the general manager said, well, you have a husband that supports you. And he has to support his wife, so therefore he's entitled to the money. So I took his salary and said that's what I was earning. And I told the truth about my age. So it really shocked me that at 45, they fired me for my age. I had a lot of options, one of which is to sue, but I was not working for just a local television station. I was working for a corporation that had 4 other television stations. And I knew from the past, the women that won, they lost on appeal. So I started looking for another show. And I got to work on a local cable outlet, and I won an Emmy doing a show, and I won it against my old show. The idea is that felt better than the Emmy. Okay, so the thing is that he fired me too, but he fired me for my mouth. He thought I had a big mouth, and I was disrespectful. And I'm not going to tell that story because the story is in the book. But the thing is that I just got 17 rejections, and I realized that CBS was right, that I was too old to be in front of a camera. And so I decided to take one chance, and I come to Hollywood. And I knew that I was going to get one chance. I knew I was a woman of a certain age, and I knew that I had to come up with something clever for somebody to notice me. And this is what I did. I got a friend from New York, put me at 20th Century Fox for 5 days. In the old days, you could get onto a movie lot, much easier. And on those 5 days, I called television stations all over the country. And by the time I was finished in 5 days, I had 55 television stations willing to take my movie star interviews, which I didn't have, and they were going to get it for free, and the studio was going to pay for it, but the studio didn't even know what I was doing. And that's how I started.
Well, I mean, what a story. This is like a movie in itself.
When you're desperate, you come up with all kinds of crazy ideas, and maybe one of them will work. I only came up with one crazy idea, but it did work. I knew I was a good interviewer. And so I had nothing to lose. I talked to those stations. Those stations were me. I came from local television. They were local television. We speak the same language. It doesn't matter whether it's New York or whether it's Des Moines or Chicago or Philadelphia or San Diego.
For people who don't know what junket style is, to basically, this is the point you got in your career where you would do the celebrity interviews and then kind of package them together. And then the affiliates, which all are part of different networks, would air your content, basically all of the interviews you did.
And they would get them for free. I figured this out. And the studios would pay me. And here is what I created. You never saw me. Never. And you couldn't cut into the package the way it was designed. What they got was my voice for timing and pronunciation and a script. And it was key that the anchor, whoever was hosting, whether it was the morning show or the new news or the 6 o'clock news, they would front the piece. And they would front it by saying, recently, we caught up with the first one I sent out, Paul Newman. Okay, you think they were going to turn me down?
That's not a bad first. Can you talk about maybe your worst interview? Because I know you've interviewed close to 1,000 celebrities, right? So there has to be one standout that was just terrible.
There's more than one, but the most difficult one was Tommy Lee Jones. You walk in to do the interview and he's sitting like this, which is, if anybody knows anything about body language, the wall is up. And it was for a so-so movie called Volcano. I didn't care about the movie. I don't think he did either, but that's another story. And it was like pulling teeth to get an answer. I don't exist in an interview. He has to give me something. They have to give me something. And so I did something terrible. At the time I was a blonde. I don't mean to offend blondes, but I came very dumb. And I just said, you've got to help me because I just don't. And finally he gave me something. If you're looking for the original Harrison Ford interview, I think that interview was only because he had never done an interview and he didn't know what to do. And he was loaded with marijuana. There, I said it all. That's in my book too.
That's what I've heard. In your book too, you talk a lot about breaking the ice. And I think this is something that applies to our viewers too, because you go on a show, you do an interview, and the host's job is to make you feel comfortable. And sometimes it just doesn't click. And then what do you do?
Well, I think, what do? You try again. If the first opening didn't work to get whoever you're interviewing relaxed, then you listen to the answer and see if anywhere in the answer, and you have to listen to be a good interviewer. You have to listen. And there's usually something. Now, what I use and what I have discovered over the years is that I do a lot of research. Anything that's in print becomes 3 times more powerful on video. So if they've already said it, they're comfortable enough. I also look for interesting moments. Now, I'm dealing with major movie stars, and usually they will not talk about their private life or anything personal. But guess what's available? Childhood, mistakes that led to the career opening, little stories they will tell, and they don't feel like you're intruding because they want to say, look where I was, look what happened to me, without saying that. So I always went for what happened when they were young. I always asked a simple question: did you always know you wanted to be an actor? And there wasn't 2 answers that were alike. Also, when you package something, if you give the user, the end user, something soft, like an I word, all of the pieces I did in 23 years always open with the star on camera saying, I always wanted, I did this, I didn't have a job, but I held on, something. Or If you want to know, did you always want to be an actor? No, but the drama club had the prettiest girls. So there were always all kinds of stories.
I wrote down some key takeaways. Research, super important. And then to use in that research anything you find in print, because the person obviously is comfortable talking about it already. And then moments, so little nuggets you can find to which you can relate. And then the I word, which is always kind of your lead in, your hook to the package.
Exactly.
Nice. In your book, you mention an experience or a couple experiences with Meryl Streep, which I think is a super good story. Can you share a bit of that with us?
Meryl Streep she's so incredible. So it was a surprise to find out that she's really very shy. Though if you really dissect Meryl Streep, you lose Meryl Streep when she becomes a character. It's like she puts on a pair of fine leather gloves and you only see the gloves. You don't see the hand underneath it. And so the first time I interviewed her was for Ironweed, and we were on the set. We were told to be there at 11 o'clock. We were set up at 10:30. We had a small little niche on that film set. And in she walks at 11 o'clock, wet hair, glasses, and no makeup.
Wow.
And this was difficult because in that film, her co-star is Jack Nicholson. And in his contract, we don't get to do an interview with him. So everything was riding on the interview with Meryl Streep. And I had to say to her, this interview is going to last a long time. And I think you would be happier with some makeup. And nobody knows this. I don't even know if I should have said it, but I didn't realize that we did the interview anyway. And I've never shown it to anybody, and I didn't realize until I was looking for interviews for the book that that's my new book. It's going to have the interviews. Is that there was this interview with her. I have to say, she really looked terrible, terrible. So I came back and I told them that I didn't think we had an interview that worked. And I was really scared because they take jobs away from you, like not for no reason. And she decided she would redo the interview with me. She was only going to do 2 interviews for that film, and she did that one. And do you want me to tell the rest of the story of what happened to the interview?
Yeah.
Okay. So I go to New York, I spend an hour with her. It's incredible. But I also knew that she was going to be in Australia when Ironweed was going to open, and the video publicity was going to go out early. So I said to her before I left New York, I will send you a script and a VHS of all of the sound bites I want to use. For the audience, the sound bite is what the star says. And I did. And she X'd out what she didn't want and sent it back to me. When it was time to cut the interview, I get a phone call from a horrible man who was horrible to me from a studio. And of course, he wasn't at a studio anymore, so he was a consultant. And he says, I need you to turn over all the raw footage. And I said, I can't do that. I made a commitment to Meryl that I would only send the footage she approved. And it got so bad with him threatening me over and over, day in and day out, that I had to hire a lawyer to go to the production company to tell them what was going on. I don't know what the lawyer did, my lawyer, but they eventually gave me the interview to cut, the footage that I had promised that I would use. And he got the last word. He called me up and he threatened me and he told me I would never work in this town again. I did work for, I think, another 20 years. I don't use his name because he's still around and he still has some power. But I have to tell you, that's really more a story of Hollywood than just me. There is a little postscript to this story, if you don't mind. Last year, I went to a party at CAA for Little Women, and Meryl was there. And I got a chance to tell her the story I just told you. And she said to me, "Why would you risk your career?" Because it was very early in my career. And I said, "Because I made a commitment to you and I felt it was important." And she hugged me. She was amazed that I would do that, that I would protect her, because there's a lot of very personal things in this interview. Because once they get comfortable with you, they do talk.
Well, she had your word, and I guess that's something rare nowadays. And
Very.
you literally put it on the line for her.
Exactly.
And what closure to have, though, years later to meet up with her. And
Absolutely.
that's incredible. I know Meryl too, Meryl Streep, and some other A-listers like Emma Watson, they talk about this thing called imposter syndrome, where they feel like they're not worthy of their success, and behind the scenes, they're very insecure. So that can be something difficult for an interview, because on camera, yeah, they become these characters, super talented, but then when it's interviews, when it's, the tapes aren't rolling, you have to find that piece to get it out of them.
Well, I understand that well, because I always thought I was an imposter. And I kept thinking, "Oh, am I lucky? Look how good Meryl was to me. Oh, look how good Harrison Ford was to me the second time." And I had a hard time acknowledging that I was the puppet master and I was pulling the strings to make these interviews work. But a lot of times, I think because the studios put a lot of pressure on you to deliver, and you know how fragile their word is, it takes very little. I was fired off a lot of things. I eventually get them back, but at the time, it's very painful. And I really didn't acknowledge how good I was, even though in the beginning of this interview, I said I knew I was a good interviewer. I think working in local television, because I could be on camera, and if I made a mistake, I could cover it while the interview is going on. But when I was working off camera, and I had to really rely on them giving me things to use, it's when I got scared that maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't getting what I needed. But after a while, I did believe in myself. It took a while. But I understand what you're saying. They also have a facade.
Yeah.
And I saw interviews that I did with people 15, 20 years ago, and they're still using the same story. So.
Yeah, you find what works and what doesn't. And your part too about being fired so many times, it's this common story you hear amongst very successful people in the industry, whether it be Hollywood or news media, that yeah, they get fired 10, 15 times. I have one mentor who's a very successful anchor at the network, and she got fired, I think, 17 times before she got to the network. And being a woman too, she goes, yeah, I just have to keep pushing, keep trying, and you can't lose faith in yourself.
Well, I think the best word to pocket is tenacity. People really judge you in such a positive way if you come back and try again, which is how I got that first show at ABC. I went there for 9 months, once a week. And he finally gave me a half-hour show on Wednesday afternoons at 2:00. That's how it started. But if I had given up, I would have never even had the chance.
Part of what TVGuestpert does is preps the experts and the guests for these types of interviews with people like yourself. What are some of the qualities that you've noticed in your career that make for the best interviews from the celebrities?
Stories. Any kind of story that it's about them. It doesn't have to be, it isn't who they're sleeping with, who they're dating, what they're, even not what they're eating, but stories of how they did things in their life. Well, let me give you an example. My first interview with Harrison Ford, I thought, was not very successful. But the second time I sat down with him, he was a superstar. The first time was Star Wars and nobody knew who he was. In fact, he didn't know who he was. But the second time was for Air Force One. He knew who he was. I did the research. I walked in and I said to him, don't worry about the questions. I know all the answers. So he smiled. And my first question, you play the best heroes on film. Are you getting back at the bullies that beat you up at school? I found that on the internet. He smiled. He said, I only told that to one person. But whoever he told it to put it out.
Yeah.
I grabbed it and he answered it. And it just broke the ice. And I interviewed him 4 more times for 4 different other films. And he actually liked me, which is very hard to say because he's not easy. He's very shy and he doesn't suffer fools lightly. And if he doesn't like where you're going in the interview, he will cut it short. And on that note, I must admit that I'm not perfect. I'm in this Air Force One interview. It's a 20-minute interview. And the man running the room with the 2 cameras put a 10-minute tape in. When I do an interview, I don't hear anything but what the star is saying to me, because I'm always looking for those kernels that I can come back on. The tape stops and Harrison Ford looks over my shoulder to his camera. And he said, put another tape in, we're not finished.
Somebody's paying attention.
We go back to start the interview again. And I said to him, I forgot the question. He remembered, he gave me the question back.
Wow.
He could have said, thank you very much, it was nice meeting you, blah, 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 blah. But he didn't. He gave me the rest of the interview.
I want to talk a little bit about just your experience with affiliates, San Diego, and then also was Philly, right?
No, Phoenix.
Phoenix. So from working with affiliates, it's a whole different ball game because you do get a lot of experience. A lot of times with the smaller markets, you don't necessarily have an EP, a producer. You're a one-woman show or a one-man show. Do you think all those years of experience in smaller markets informed your interviews in the future?
It created me, to be honest. It created me. First of all, I had to learn how to do my own makeup. I didn't have makeup artists. Second, I had to learn how to research an interview and realize what I wanted. I want to go back to the early days of my career because I thought that if you could talk, you could interview. And that's a mistake that a lot of people make. And on the 3rd interview, for the 3rd show that I did in Phoenix, I was doing it once a week. I get to interview Hugh Downs, who had moved to Carefree, Arizona. He was still doing 20/20 with Barbara Walters on the network, but during the week he was in Phoenix, Arizona. And he came on the show and I did all this research and I asked all these questions and I found out, my questions are better than his answers. What's wrong? We went to a commercial break and I came back and I said to him, teach me how to interview. Oh, by the way, I put down my clipboard because I honestly thought in the old days, if I had a clipboard, that's how you interview, but that's another story. And he said, who, when, where, and why. 4 fundamentals that you look for when you want to do an interview. Then let your natural curiosity lead you. And the most important thing is research. And I followed exactly what he said.
So for all the future guestperts or experts listening, tenacity, that's one. Stories, super important. Your four fundamentals, the W's. Curiosity, and then research we keep coming back to, which I think whether you're interviewer, interviewee, very important on both sides of the spectrum because you
Know
want
who's interviewing you. If you're
right,
the guest,
exactly.
find out who the person is that's going to interview you. That's really important because you're going to be nervous. And you can give them something back. Oh, I see you won an Emmy. What was it exciting? Anything that you can break the ice back.
Right.
It helps you. When somebody laughs or somebody smiles, it makes such a difference.
What about talking points? When you're kind of working almost as the middleman or middlewoman between studio, affiliates, network, how did it work with that? You came up with some of your own, or did some come from PR or the network, or?
I only got um, one time from one publicist when I was interviewing Sting, of all people. His publicist said, you can't ask him about the dinner party his wife gave for Guy Ritchie where he meets Madonna. Can I tell you, I wasn't going to ask him that question anyway. But the studios left me totally alone. You have to understand that when I made a package, and it was the rough cut of it, the studio had to approve it. And they could make any change they want. And I didn't, for the most part, argue about the changes.
So you had a lot of creative control over your content.
Well, I think it's because in the beginning, the first job that I got from on my own, because I worked for people to prove that my little television network was viable. But when my first job was at Universal, it was Jack Lemmon. She knew me from when I had worked at Universal. She saw what the profile looked for, and she trusted me. It didn't hurt that after I did the interview with Jack Lemmon, that he sent me a note saying I was the best interview he had ever had in 30 years. No, he actually said 3 decades. So, and that changed my whole career. That changed everything because all of a sudden this unknown person at Universal got a stamp of approval from a 2-time Emmy winner. Oscar winner.
And then that was one of your first, right? Paul Newman, Jack Lemmon.
Yeah, I had some big names. The very first one, which never aired, was Robert Redford, okay, on the set of The Natural. And he approved my interview, but he didn't approve the man that hired me, his hour special on The Natural. And there was my first taste of what power does, is that because the special wasn't approved, even though Redford approved my interview, he wouldn't let it play. And everybody wanted it. And I never had copies of it because I was working for somebody. And eventually, going through the tapes, I find a PAL, which is an international tape. We converted it, but it was only the cut piece. It was not the raw interview.
Yeah. How long were the interviews usually, on average?
On the film sets, they were 20 minutes. On the press junkets in the beginning, I always had a minimum of 10, sometimes 20. I had 20 for Al Pacino, 20 for Robert Redford, 20 for Harrison Ford. And sometimes when I had a redo, like Meryl Streep, I had an hour with her. We were just talking. But the primary, I got most of my interviews on the press junkets. Well, the beginning of my interview was all on film sets. And then as I was getting older, this is not easy for me to say, but as I was getting older, being on a film set for 14 hours and worrying whether I was going to get the star of the film was starting to wear on me. And so because I had lied about my age when I came to Hollywood, I took off a decade, just a simple decade. When I got an opportunity to work internationally, which meant I didn't have to go on film sets anymore, and I could do it in a hotel room in a city that they chose, whatever, anywhere. Like they sent me to London for interviews. You know, they didn't care where they sent me. So the truth of the matter is that once I started working in international, I was in my 60s. I mean, I was really happy not to be on film sets anymore. And I should tell you, I worked until I was nearly 72. Lying does have a place in Hollywood. I have to admit that.
What would be some tips you would give to our viewers of the podcast just for capitalizing on time for an interview? Because majority of the time for what they're doing, it's between 3 and 5 minutes. That's not a lot of time for TV.
Well, it has changed drastically from when I was doing junkets. I would say get a personal, funny interview in. If you're doing this on a press junket, they're going to give you a ton of footage that rams that movie down your throat. They're going to give you a lot of video, behind the scenes video, movie clips. So take your 3 minutes and get a funny story. Get something. Don't waste it talking about the film. Well, they're going to kill me for saying it. But they give you approved sound bites, approved everything to use in your package that you're making. So don't waste your 3 minutes talking about the movie.
Were your packages usually a minute and a half?
No. Remember, I worked before the internet. My packages were 3 minutes. It's not easy to sit here and talk to you and say, I'm obsolete. But that's what it was.
3 minutes. Yeah, times have changed because I'm just thinking now, you know, you look at the entertainment packages that come through to the affiliates, to the smaller stations, and they're usually a minute 15, couple sound bites, and that's it. So you don't really get the juicy part of the interview there.
Well, I'm going to tell you what I discovered by trial and error because I didn't know what I was doing. The very first interview I sent out was 5 minutes. And they broke it in half and ran it for 2 days on the 11 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock, depending on where they were. But then I went down to 3. And if they were looking for a minute and a half, they had it. They said to me, and it's very interesting because they knew more at the local level than I did. They said there were natural breaks in the interview that they could run it on 2 consecutive days, even if I said 3 minutes.
What are some tips to get? I mean, I'm curious as far as you, like some journalists, they don't like to watch themselves. Same with actors, others do, and they pick themselves apart and find places to improve. What did you do in the span of your career?
I never looked at my interviews. Well, wait a minute. I'm going to take that back. I didn't have to. I wasn't in them. The finished piece never had me in it. So I could really be objective to how I wanted it to play. Now that I've looked back, there's very little footage of me doing the interviews because I turned my company over to my daughter. And she said, we have too many B tapes, which is what I was, a B. The star is always an A. And so she threw out all the tapes. So there are very few of me actually doing an interview.
What's advice that Reba now would give to Reba when she was starting out at 37?
That's a good question. Be brave. Don't be afraid to fail. I think that was the biggest thing, looking back, how powerful failure is to make you better and clever. And if you don't let it own you, but you learn from failure, you become extremely powerful. Not power in power, but inside of you. You say, I can do this. And if I can't do it this way, maybe I can do it another way. And that's how I found my niche, is in another way.
If you could go back and change something about your career, what would it be?
That I had the courage to start younger. But I didn't. I was married, I was raising children, and marriage to me was very important. I say that because I'm now a widow and I had a very long marriage. And my husband was the one that his career was important. And so wherever he went, and we moved a lot, I started over. And finally, when we get to Phoenix, it was my turn. All the kids were kind of old enough that they could take care of themselves. Now, I don't mean totally take care of themselves, but I had a chance to do something for myself. If I was young and starting out like you are, I would love it.
But a testament to success, though, the fact that you can start later in life, which you talk about in your book, and just some of the obstacles you faced and how you came through, and working for what, 23 years or almost 30 years, and thousands of celebrity interviews and A-listers every single time. I mean, what a testament to your confidence and your drive, and the fact that anything is possible in Hollywood.
Yes, anything is possible. In fact, they never knew how old I was, even when I stopped working, and I didn't come out of the closet until I was 75.
Wow.
Okay.
Incredible. It's just, you look really good. And I think part of that too is they say, there's that quote, if you enjoy what you're doing, you never work a day in your life. And that's probably why you look so youthful.
Well, I really did love what I was doing. And I didn't do it for money. I did it for passion. And I think I did it for one other thing that maybe I'm brave enough to share with you. My daughter asked me, where did the drive come from to do this? And I said, I wanted to show my mother that I could do more than just keep getting married. I got married twice. Okay.
You say in your book too, not for the money, but for the challenge. So I think.
And the passion.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if our viewers are interested in reading your book.
Oh, look, aren't I lucky? There it is. And it's on Amazon.
If you want to hear more anecdotes from Reba, and also there's definitely good tips in there for TV guestperts and people looking to book themselves on segments, as well as Jackie's book too. So lots of good reading there, and easy reading, fun reading. It took me less than a day to read Reba's book and was super into it. Once you start reading, you just can't put it down. And it's all real life. It's Hollywood in real life. Where can our viewers find you on social media?
RebaMerrill.com. I have a website. There are some interviews up there. I think Harrison Ford is up there and Whitney Houston. We're in the process of changing it because I have a new book coming out, and I want my website to have this is really my hair, and I'm not a blonde anymore. I don't know, what a surprise. And so I'm changing the website so you can see what I look like today.
Sounds good. I love too how honest you are and how blunt about everything, and just how real all the stories you tell are from the heart. So.
Let me tell you something. I think you were very good. Okay. For an interviewer to judge an interviewer, and I'm usually not kind. You did your homework, which means you did the research. I didn't make it easy because it took me forever to find a way to send you the book because of the post office conditioning today, but you did it. I didn't sit here and say, is she going to make a fool out of me? Is she going to ask me stupid questions that go nowhere because she doesn't know who I am or what I did? And you definitely pass. I will give you an A for the interview.
Well, and here too, this is behind the scenes look of what goes on too. And just to reiterate some of the points you made, research, 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 and then also stories. You have tenacity, which I think applies to a lot of different areas. The stories, just to reiterate that again. And then the four fundamentals. So just to establish the who, what, when, where, why, how, these types of things, which are really going to help inform the interview, whether you're the interviewer or E. And if you want to find more of this podcast, you can look for it wherever you listen to your podcasts, which is Front and Center by TVGuestpert. And follow TVGuestpert on social media, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Jackie Jordan is there. And Reba, thank you so much for sharing these personal stories and for your time. And can't wait to have you back on. It was such a pleasure.